I'd like to call to order the meeting of the November 7th, 2018 Frederick County Planning Commission. If you would, join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. First item on the agenda is the adoption of our agenda. We have no changes to our agenda tonight. I'll take a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is the approval of our minutes from our August 15th, 2018 meeting and our September 19th, 2018. If there's no changes or additions to these minutes, they'll stand as approved. I'll have a motion to approve.
So moved.
I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's approved. Thank you. Our next is our committee reports. And first one tonight, I'll start with Mr. Moan from our comprehensive plans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the Comp Plan Committee meeting in October, the committee considered the Carter Tract Comprehensive Plan amendment application. It was unanimously recommended to move forward for further study, and it will be coming to the November committee meeting, which will be held on the 19th.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Our next committee report will be from Mr. Oates for transportation.
Yes, sir. We met on October 22nd. Just had a few items on the agenda. One was a discussion of the transportation forum, which was held just a few days later out at the airport. The second was the Highway Safety Improvement Program. We had someone from VDOT come and basically present that program, things they're doing in the area to try to improve safety. The sheriff was there, mentioned that I believe it was the last 40 or 47 accidents where people just basically texting and driving off the road, nobody around. So it's hard to fix stupid, but they're trying. They're going to start putting some rumble strips out here on Route 37 to try and keep people in their lanes. And I'm looking at some other items. There's also discussion about the corridor study of Variety 1 that was held, I believe down Bridgewater, if I'm not mistaken, but a number of improvements out of that study for this area were excluded. Looks like we might be able to get some of them back into the plan, which would be basically adding third lane out here through 81 out between 315 and 317. And then there's just an update on some projects in the county.
All righty. Thanks, sir. And since we really love listening to your voice, you get to do 2 Frederick Water reports back to back. Carry on, Mr. Oates.
Yeah, since we didn't meet in October, the report for the Frederick Water Board of Directors meeting on September the 18th, there was discussion of the Rebecca water supply that was advancing through the design process. 60% design drawings have been received. Staff was reviewing at that time. The cultural resources field work at the water treatment plant was underway and slated for completion within the next couple of weeks. That report, once assembled, was going to go to the Corps of Engineers to get the final permit from them so construction could start. For the operations report, the customer base was 15,800 connections. Monthly water production the previous month was 6.37 million gallons a day, which is typical summer demand. The Eel water treatment plant, north and south quarries, continued to recharge and are just about overflowing. So they're full and in excellent shape for the winter coming up. And the water production at Deal for that month was 2.5 million gallons a day. And then for our October 16th meeting, Dick Helm with the Frederick Winchester Service Authority presented an update on the green energy plant, where basically it's taking the methane created. It's a large building out there at Bladder. If you've noticed it from Route 30 or from Route 7, it looks like a big white balloon, but that's actually full of methane. And it's running a generator, and it's producing almost half the power needed to run the plant. And they're looking at studies to add in a second generator because there's excess methane, and potentially get the plant up to where it's generating as much electricity as it uses. That's the ultimate goal. Second item was a discussion of the Stevens City and Frederick Water term sheet to end litigation. The board unanimously approved the term sheet, which went on to Stevens City, I believe, the following week, where they also approved it. And currently, the documents that will achieve settlement are being worked on, and hopefully we can have that wrapped up before the year's over. For the September operations report that is presented in the October meeting, the customer base was at 16,000 connections. Water production was down to 5.74 because we were starting into the fall. And the quarries are still full, and they're continuing to be full with all this rain.
You all have been quite busy at Frederick Water. Thank you. Our next committee report will be our liaison from the Winchester Planning Commission, Dr. Fio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Planning Commission met yesterday in a pre-session prior to our regular meeting to be held on the 20th. At that time, there will be 3 public hearings, a conditional use permit for an extended stay lodging, a ordinance amendment pertaining to building mounted signs in the B2, C1, M1, and M2 districts affecting regional shopping centers, and RZ 18-743 is an ordinance to rezone 13.07 acres at 3102 Shawnee Drive from M1 to CM1 district. This is the site of the former offices of American Woodmark, and there is an interest by one of the local private schools to develop a campus here. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. Our last committee report is our Board of Supervisor liaison, Ms. Trout.
Good evening. The Board of Supervisors last met on October 24th at 7 p.m., and we had no Planning Commission business.
None. Very good.
report.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is our citizen comment portion. This portion of our meeting is for anyone that'd like to come before us and speak that about something that's not on our agenda. So if anyone has anything they would like to on their mind, now's your time. Seeing no one, I'll close the citizen comment portion of the meeting. We'll get into our first public hearing item, and our only public hearing item tonight is we have a rezoning before us of number 03-1A for Carpers Valley Industrial Park, submitted by Panoni Associates Incorporated to rezone 122.18 plus or minus acres from R4 Residential Plan Community District to the M1 Light Industrial District with proffers. The properties are located approximately 1 mile east of IU-1 on the south side of Millwood Pike, Route 50 east of Prince Frederick Drive, Route 781, and Culverstone Drive in the Shawnee Magisterial District, and are identified by property identification numbers 64-A86 and 64-A87. Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm going to go through this rezoning request, and with the assistance of Mr. Bishop, who will be stepping up here shortly to talk specifically about the transportation. As you mentioned, this is a request to rezone a total of 122 acres from the R4, which is a residential plan community district, to the M1 district with proffers. Now, the subject property is part of the original Carpers Valley Governor's Hill rezoning, which was approved initially by the county in 2005. It was subsequently rezoned in 09, in 13, and in 14. Rezoning 1105, part of it provided for 143 acres of commercial uses combined with a variety of residential uses, which would enable approximately 550 residential units. There were 6 parcels of land that were associated with that rezoning request, and it was divided into 2 land bays, Land Bay 1, which was predominantly residential, and Land Bay 2, which was the commercial land bay. The properties for which this rezoning is being requested are highlighted on your screen to the left. Again, the 2 parcels that you mentioned, parcels 86 and parcels 87. That provides the location for the parcels, and of course it's just south of Route 50, as you mentioned, Millwood Pike, and just north of Winchester Regional Airport. The map that is on the screen to your left identifies the current zoning of the property, and it recognizes the property as a whole, if you will, with the R4 residential planned community designation. Skipping from the current zoning to the future land use, which of course is a consideration with any rezoning request, you can see that the whole property is covered with kind of the commercial zoning designation, B2, B3. Again, the property to the south is the Winchester Regional Airport. Point out, of course, the long-range land use plan, because with any rezoning, we look at what the comprehensive plan calls for in that area. This is located within the limits of the Sensney Eastern Frederick Urban Area Plan of the 2035 Comprehensive Plan, and that depicts the property with a commercial land use designation, which is reflective of the approved rezoning for the property that occurred in 2005. That is the commercial component of that property. The requested M1 zoning district, therefore, is inconsistent with the commercial designation that's currently in our comprehensive plan. On the screen to your left is the currently approved generalized development plan for the rezoning request, and you can see how the current project lays itself out with the road system, Coverstone Drive, extended from Prince Frederick all the way out to Route 50. It also shows the Land Bay 1, if you will, which is predominantly the residential area to the east of the project. That gives us the context from where we are today. As I mentioned, the applicant is looking to sever two parcels, 86 and 87, from that original rezoning request and rezone them to the M1 district. In doing so, they're providing a new and separate set of proffers that are just specifically for the two parcels that are part of this request. You'll see that your agenda goes through a variety of the proffers, if you will, in the application, and highlights a variety of different things associated with those proffers. Lots of details, of course, are contained within that. But the primary changes with the rezoning include modifications to the overall transportation network that was approved with the Governor's Hill rezoning. Those transportation improvements were shared jointly by Land Bays 1 and Land Bays 2. On the screen to your left is the proposed generalized development plan that goes along with this current rezoning request. And as you can see, it is specific to the two parcels for which the rezoning is being requested, the 122 acres that comprise the original Land Bay 2. Mr. Bishop will go into a little bit more detail with regards to the road layout of that just in a moment. The applicant, with their M1 zoning, is proffering 450,000 square feet of industrial land uses and up to 805,000 square feet of warehousing. You'll notice in the proffer statement there's a mention of high cube warehousing, which is a certain component, if you will, of that is unique, slightly less traffic generation of the warehousing. It also gives them the ability to construct all uses within the M1 district and allow them to increase that to a slightly higher amount with an updated traffic impact analysis. It's important to recognize at this point that the proposed rezoning and the proposed proffers removes the commercial square footage that was originally part of the request, which was the trigger for the completion of Coverstone Drive. There was an incremental an allowance, if you will, of the commercial square footage that then coincidentally allowed for the improvements to Coverstone Drive. A couple of other points to make as we look at the changes. Similar architectural styles and signage in conformance with the zoning ordinance is a proffer. Now that, of course, separates it from the overall development, streetscape design standards, landscaping plan, and architectural standards that came with the combined project, which was, of course, Governor's Hill. So while they're providing some proffer that would provide that, it's not the same as what was part of the original rezoning request. Fire and rescue is another highlighted proffer where there's a $15,000 contribution based on the first occupancy permit with this industrial development. We're familiar with other rezonings, of course, proffering a per square foot amount, and 10 cents a square foot has been the most recently kind of endorsed series of proffers in that regard. So point that out too. And now at this point, I'm going to let Mr. Bishop take over and talk a little bit about the transportation and site access from the comprehensive plan perspective and their TIA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As Mr. Ruddy noted, I'll be focusing on transportation this evening. And if I can go straight to my graphic, it really is what we're dealing with, summed up well in our Eastern Road Plan in terms of the scope, if you will, of how much this project can impact our overall transportation plan. I'd like to bring your attention to the subject property right here in this area. And of course, these properties here were formerly part of the former rezoning, but not this one. You have the access road here over to the residential portion, and here you have Coverstone Drive, which up to here is actually complete, and of course, that's where our sheriff's office is here. Now, as you see, that comes from Millwood Pike, Route 50, to existing Coverstone Drive, and eventually all the way over to this pink line, which you may be aware of. That's 522 North relocated. And then, of course, right over here is the project we're fixing to go to bid on, which is Crossover Boulevard into the city of Winchester with additional crossing over Interstate 81. Now, why is this network important? Well, it's important because of all these folks over here. It's important because of all these folks over here that are off the map. And eventually, it's going to be important for all these residential units here because this area of Route 50 between Prince Frederick Drive and the Interstate 81 interchange at exit 313 is already today significantly congested. So as we implement that network, it's about providing alternatives to our existing citizens as well as the citizens that are on the way and providing better traffic flows in that area. Now, once again, this is the master plan for the currently approved rezoning. And as you can see, once again, it does have that roadway network adopted as part of it. The access to the residential portion, which is not part of this rezoning that's proposed before you tonight, but is part of your currently approved rezoning, and of course, Coverstone Drive. Now, if I can get into the existing proffers a little bit. Right now, phase one of the existing proffers builds this. Begins your access from Millwood Pike, Route 50. It signalizes that intersection at Inverly. It puts in turn lanes at that intersection, and it builds a 4-lane section right out to here. Now, the only thing that's allowed to take place under the current proffers before that is done is up to 300,000 square foot of office can be located in here and accessed off of existing Coverstone Drive. That's what can happen under phase one. Now, moving to phase two, anything that would exceed 400,000 square foot of development would build 2 lanes of this green section. So that would be our first actual complete section to where you could drive all the way from Millwood back to Prince Frederick Drive. And then before they could exceed 800,000 square foot, they would build the other 2 lanes. Now, important note to note as well, before you can build anything over here or get a certificate of occupancy rather for anything over here in the residential section that isn't a model home, access has to be completed from Millwood. So even though, as you'll see as I get into the proposed proffers, that this section is going to be built and this is eventually where the roadway will access over here, their proffers don't go away. These current proffers will still apply to those parcels that are not part of this rezoning this evening. A couple of additional proffers worth noting. It's not the entirety of the proffers, but I'm trying to hit the highlights for you. There are also significant cash proffers as part of your currently approved rezoning. There's $75,000 that's applicable toward improvements of the intersection of Victory Boulevard and Millwood Pike Route 50. So that's your next significant intersection once you get past Sulphur Springs Road. And then there are $175,000 in proffers for this intersection of Costello Drive and Prince Frederick Drive right here. That could potentially be signalization or some other form of improvement. Moving now into what's proposed, and it's probably easy, so I'm going to skip ahead and work off the graphic, if you will, and hopefully I won't get anything wrong. I promise Ty will correct me if I do. But now, instead of beginning at Millwood Pike, we're beginning at existing Coverstone Drive. And with their first building permit or before the first CO, they would be constructing 4 lanes from A to B, 4 lanes divided with the bike path and all that. Before they can exceed 400,000 square feet, they would be building B to C. Once again, 4 lanes with bike path. And finally, there's a Phase 3, which is not specifically tied to a development trigger, but is noted that they would either build or bond this section to tie into the neighboring property. Remember, this strip is not part of the proposed rezoning tonight. That once whoever, whether it be these guys or these guys over here, is building this connection down to Millwood, this would either be bonded or built. Now, in addition to that, they are dedicating the Tazewell Lane, which is that access road over to the residential portion. They're dedicating the right-of-way for that. There's a future right-of-way dedication along Coverstone Drive adjacent to the Army Corps property, which if I go back to this, that is this triangle right here. That right now is just kind of a leftover strip from when the road was built before that they're offering up as potential right-of-way. And finally, there's cash remuneration to the county if right-of-way is unavailable for some of the off-site improvements, which I'm about to get into, are not completed or not available to do those improvements. Now, these off-site improvements are all part of Phase 1, so they would be doing these as part of that first segment that I mentioned as well. Now, the first of those is out on 522, existing 522. Right here's the Costco for your point of reference, and here's Costello Drive intersection with 522. What they're proposing to do is extend the left turn lane, the current left turn lane, to provide additional stacking there. Frankly, this is an area where many of us are used to already backing into today, because right now you have a fairly long left turn lane onto Costello Drive, and then it transitions into a 2-way left turn lane, and then finally it begins to transition into the left turn lane that'll get you into the IHOP and all of that. The next off-site improvement is at the other end of Costello Drive, where it intersects with Prince Frederick Drive. And what they are doing is providing a dedicated left turn lane for southbound Frederick Drive onto Costello Drive, as well as a dedicated right turn lane onto Costello Drive from Prince Frederick Drive. And that does end up, to create that dedicated left, it does make you have to provide a new through lane, so you see that going over here onto the shoulder. And finally, you have turn lane improvements really at all 4 quadrants of the intersection of Prince Frederick Drive and Millwood Pike Route 50. The actual turn lanes on Millwood Pike themselves are turn lane extensions. This is a brand-new dedicated right turn lane, and this is actually also a brand-new dedicated right turn lane, which is also proffered by the rezoning that was done over here sometime back. Now, in terms of staff concerns, I do definitely want to be upfront and note that the proposed rezoning has significantly less traffic generation than what's approved today. That's absolutely a positive. However, it is more trucks. Not a huge number of more trucks, but it is more trucks. Key concerns for us, as I noted earlier, are implementation of the comprehensive plan road network. What's being proposed, we're going from a contiguous development that was developing the road system together to separate and apparently at odds land-bay developers that have obligations. So there's a staff level concern about how feasible still is the remaining proffers that are left onto the other property owners. And that includes, for the implementation of Coverstone Drive, as well as those cash proffers, which are out there, the $75,000 that I mentioned at Victory and the $175,000 that I mentioned at Costello Drive, because all of those are taken off of the proposed proffers, but they will still exist for the other property owners that were part of the original rezoning. As I noted a moment ago, increased truck generation, not to a huge scale, but technically it's more trucks, and I feel obligated to note it. Analysis of the right-of-way for the off-site improvements. The proffer does note that there will be cash remuneration to the county if they're actually not able to implement those off-site improvements that I noted just a few moments ago. If they can't get the right-of-way, they'll develop a cost estimate, which will have to be approved by VDOT per the language of their proffer, and pay the county. The problem for us, well, if they can't get that right-of-way, we probably can't get it either without a condemnation-type action, which our board is not a board that typically condemns. So while the cash will be nice, I'm not trying to look the gift horse in the mouth, it still doesn't put us in a position of being able to address those traffic shortcomings that were meant to be addressed by those improvements. Finally, I would note the bonding from C to D. And if it would help, I can go back to that graphic. But that last segment that was to be done once the other property owners are connecting to Millwood Pike is listed in Phase 3. The concern with that is Phase 3 is really, if you look at Phase 1 and 2, they're specifically tied to square footage development triggers. In theory, Phase 3 could come after the applicant has built out, and there's really no trigger left for the county to make sure that happens. Staff would suggest that may be more appropriately bonded in Phase 1 or Phase 2 when there's something the applicant still actually needs from the county. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Mr. Reddy. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
When do you want us to ask questions, Mike?
I bet we let them finish their.
Mike was going to go through the rest of the concerns, and
Let
yeah,
them
I'm
finish it up,
available.
then we'll take questions.
I'll be very, very brief, so we certainly can jump right back into it. But in addition to the items that are noted in the staff report and that we have gone through here, I wanted also to recognize that with the original project of 1.2 million square feet of commercial land uses, that was part of the original rezoning used to offset the impacts of the 550 residential units within the development. The development impact model that was in place back in 2005 was not the one that was used most recently, and it generated approximately a $5,000 impact per residential unit, for which they received about a 50% credit. So you'll notice that the original proffer about $2,500 a unit. Obviously, that's a lot less than is out there today. So what the applicant should be doing is demonstrating that the industrial square footage proposed with the rezoning will adequately offset the impacts of the residential units on the county. As mentioned, the industrial land use designation is not the same as the commercial land use designation, and the analysis should identify if the taxable generation, if you will, is equivalent to what was originally approved. And therefore, that, of course, ties into addressing the impacts of the residential units that are part of this coordinated project. We're available to answer any questions that the Commission may have, both Mr. Bishop and I, but ultimately we will be seeking a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors on this particular request, whether that's this evening or at a future meeting. That is what we'll be looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Ruddy. Questions? Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Bishop, the future 522 is supposed to come in Prince Frederick Drive.
Yes, sir.
Go on to 50 there. How would, if this plan was implemented the way they're proposing, how would we connect the traffic from Coverstone Drive into the new 522 that would go down to 50? You would go straight instead of turning right on Prince Frederick, and then an intersection on
That's
to
the
522?
that's the general expectation today is, and the actual intersection obviously is not designed.
Right.
But you would have either a significant intersection or possibly even a roundabout at that location where that intersects. I do think it's unlikely that we would maintain this current intersection with Prince Frederick Drive, but I don't have my crystal ball handy. You know, that's not fully designed yet, but the vision is that would not necessarily stay connected.
Okay. And the off-site proffers that could result in cash to the county.
Yes, sir.
With the new legislation about accepting cash, if the county accepted that cash, it could only be used for the purpose of those transportation improvements. Is that correct?
Yeah, I
So
mean,
if the county could
I
not
can't
get.
spend that wherever I want,
Right.
no.
But if the county could not get the right-of-ways to use it for those specific transportation improvements, the money would then go back to the developer.
Without some more opening up of language in the proper language, I believe you're correct, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just from a hypothetical, generalized question on transportation planning, wouldn't it make more sense to do the Coverstone Drive from a transportation planning standpoint, the section out to 50 first, and put the tractor-trailer traffic out to 50 instead of running them around a circuitous route to Prince Frederick Drive, Costello Drive?
That was certainly our thought. And that's the way the existing rezoning is that the access to, except for potentially 300,000 square foot of office, that the new development was to be accessing through Route 50 to start with. That's why that was actually the first transportation phase of those proffers. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but one thing to keep in mind, just because I was talking about with somebody from VDOT the other day, is now if we're going to an M1, a warehousing type use, all of a sudden the inland port comes into play. So there's a respectable chance that you get a user, respectable, I don't know, like I said, I don't have my crystal ball, respectable chance that you get a user who's tied to the inland port, uses that, and they'll be going that way a significant amount. But it's very difficult to predict.
Yeah. Just, and I don't drive tractor trailers, but I would think coming down Coverstone Drive, making a right on Prince Frederick, making a left on Costello Drive to go out to make another left on 522 with tractor trailer traffic. I mean, their turning radius is significantly larger than a automobile or an SUV. So those intersections are going to be fraught with accidents and people losing fenders from turning radiuses. The other problem I see is I don't see an improvement down, if they do go down Prince Frederick Drive to 50, if they turn right, okay, that's one thing, but if they turn left, there's a significant elevation difference between the eastbound and the westbound 50 lanes
There
here.
is.
And if they turn left and go across that intersection, if you have a truck driver that hasn't driven that before, he's gonna lay that trailer on its side. Because if you're going down through there more than a couple miles an hour, you've got a significant drop there.
It's definitely not a level intersection, to say the least. Yes, sir.
And there's no improvements in any of these off-site proffers to fix that, is that right?
No, and frankly, you'd be in a tough spot to try and level that out because you've got Custer Drive already coming uphill into it from the north side. So it'd be tough to ever raise that side of 522 without cutting off Custer Drive.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any other questions? Mr. Oates?
Yeah, Mr. Bishop, you're rattling off some of the cash proffers on the original rezoning.
Yes.
I notice there's one on here that says that by June 30th, 2018, if the right-of-way and the design had been secured from Coverstone over to the new 522, there's supposed to be a $20,000 cash proffer. Was that paid?
No, sir, it wasn't played, and you're correct, I was just kind of hitting the highlights. But yes, one of the proffers on the current rezoning is that by that date that you mentioned, June of 2018, this segment would be designed if we had secured the right-of-way and everything. They were going to go ahead and design the segment that would get us to that 522 relocation. Now, I'll note, this new location of 522 was adopted by the board in December of 17. But yes, that we still do not control that right-of-way, but that $20,000 proffer has not been paid.
Well, would that be considered a zoning violation then, since the existing rezoning hasn't
I don't
been
know if that-
honored?
I defer to Mr. Ruddy or Mr. Chairman. I don't know if that falls under a zoning violation or a proffer violation. Get the words right, but thankfully, they usually chase those.
All right, Mr. Ruddy? What, if it's a proper violation, is that something that has to be cleared up before action can be taken?
The responsibility for that proffer falls with all of the property owners associated with the original rezoning request. It's an outstanding proffer, therefore it's a component of the zoning ordinance that's specific to this property, and it would need to be fulfilled before any development occurs on the property. Should this rezoning move forward, then this property would not be responsible for that proffered contribution or that commitment. That would fall on the balance of the properties as a zoning violation, if you will, as a proffer violation. So it is something to consider for sure, but moving forward with the rezoning, evaluating if that should be maintained, if you will, is appropriate.
All right, so if it moves forward, the remaining property owners are left holding the bag on Coverstone Drive, the $20,000, and then all the other cash proffers Mr. Bishop mentioned on Victory. And
All of the other commitments that remain would be the responsibility of the remaining property owners. Okay, so this rezoning request is represented by Mr. Romaslowski and Mr. Ty Lawson, so know that they have a presentation that they'd like to go through in presenting their application.
Thank you, Mr. Ruddy. Appreciate it. The applicant would like to come forward, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
State your name, please.
My name is Alex Westra. I'm with Hines, the applicant.
Okay.
And I appreciate everyone being here and hearing us out. I know it's a short agenda tonight, and I know there's been a lot of work involved before this. Many meetings, met with Mike and John almost a year ago after we put the site under contract. So I know that there's been much work involved, and I appreciate all of that. Just quickly, a little introduction on Hines. The firm was founded in 1957 in Houston, Texas by Gerald Hines, who was an engineer out of Purdue, made his way down to Texas. The firm has developed about 300 million square feet of a variety of different asset types all over the world, currently operates in about 20 different countries. And one of the things that really distinguishes Hines, I believe, from some of the other developers is the commitment to high-class architecture, the best-in-class architecture and design and the highest building standards. And we believe that building better buildings really promotes, will maximize value over the long term. And we're very much long-term investors and long-term developers. This is a picture of Mr. Hines here, who a bit more my senior, but the point I want to make here is even though it's a very large company, it's still family held, and we still pride ourselves on our integrity, not just in our buildings, but also the way that the firm and its employees operate and the long-term relationships we have with our stakeholders. I would also say, I know we have a bunch of items to discuss here tonight, and I completely appreciate that. And we've had previous discussions. We're trying to listen and be responsive. But I would say that I believe that this development will be a major benefit to the county, not only in terms of the jobs, tax revenue of over $500,000 per year if built out, and also activating a parcel that has been undeveloped in a pretty prime location for a number of years, and that just has vacant buildings sitting on it now. And the last thing that I would add is I know many of you are familiar that there was a lawsuit that was filed earlier this week against the current owner of the property or current owners of the property. I just want to make it clear that Hines was not a party to that suit. and we hope it gets resolved swiftly between the parties that are involved, and if not, it will go through the court system. And again, I thank you for your time, and we'll hand it off to Pannoni here.
All righty. Thanks, sir. Nice having you tonight.
Good evening. My name is Ron Maslowski. I'm with Pannoni here in Winchester, and we're working with Hines on this rezoning. It's good to be here. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out. So going back to the generalized development plan, this project, as alluded to by Mr. Ruddy and Mr. Bishop, does have a long history. I'd like to spend just a couple minutes going through how we ended up where we are. The property was rezoned in 2005 to propose the uses that we have here today. However, so there was commercial here, there was residential here. The Hockman parcel was not part of that original development, and Coverstone Drive actually came through the site and intersected down here at Sulphur Springs and Route 50. So that rezoning was approved. Miller and Smith got ownership of the properties involved. The Dick properties over here and the JGR3 properties over here. Hockman was not included, and design proceeded. Miller and Smith realized that the cut section to make this work was going to be too expensive and was going to, because of the slopes involved, the cut slopes involved, was going to take out a lot of developable land. So at the same time, the county was looking at a relocation of Route 522, as John Bishop talked about, and it was thought that that 522 would follow this path, aligned with Inverly, which would go all the way up through the Ambrose Farm to Greenwood Road. And so Miller and Smith, at that point, got control of the Hockman parcel to try and make this vision a reality. And again, it was still the 550 residential developments and the 1.2 million square feet of commercial area. Following that, in 2000, after nothing has happened on the site since 2009 to 2013, Miller and Smith had to come in and extend the timelines for completion of Coverstone Drive, had to push that out 10 years to 2025, and also pushed out the payment of the proffer that Mr. Oates alluded to a few minutes ago. And since that time, they did that. Nothing over the last 5 years, nothing has still happened on the property. So they basically have, under the current zoning, have until 25 to build all of Coverstone Drive, or they would be in further violation of the zoning. Then in 2014, between 2013 and 2014, Miller and Smith had a deed of trust with Mr. Hockman and the JGR3 parcels. They had stopped making payments. Those two properties foreclosed on Miller and Smith. Ownership reverted back to the original property owners. And then JRG3 came in for an independent rezoning text amendment, similar to what we're doing right now, to increase the allowed office space that was allowed to be developed back here without any road improvements whatsoever to 300,000 square feet. And that was generally in response to a GSA solicitation for an FBI office. And the JGR3 parcel wanted to make their property qualify. So they got the proffer changed to go to 300,000 square feet without any improvements, without any offsite improvements, and without any extension to Coverstone Drive. So that brings us to 2018, where in this proposal, as John Bishop mentioned, our proposal proposes constructing Coverstone Drive to the limits of our property. We do not change the routing of Coverstone Drive. Coverstone Drive is still shown to be extended from Prince Frederick or 522 relocated, which is shown here now, through to Inverly. But the responsibility for building that, we're taking responsibility for building it through our parcel in 3 phases. And the remaining part will be the responsibility of the residential section if that ever develops. There are 3 phases. the first phase, A to B, would be done to support the first phase of the development, 400,000 square feet. The second phase, B to C, would be done to support the second and third phase of the development or fully develop the property. And then C to D would be done coincident with the extension of Coverstone Drive north to Millwood Avenue. And the proffers are clear that we'd either build it or bond it so that that road is there when that last road section is constructed. We did receive comments from all the agencies that are required by Frederick County. I'll talk about a couple of them. VDOT commented, they did review the TIA, they had some comments, we responded to the comments, and VDOT accepted the traffic study and the improvements that were shown to mitigate the trips being generated on our site, and all of the improvements that were identified in the TIA are specifically proffered, and John Bishop went through those. We also got a comment from the Airport Authority, our neighbor to the south, fully supportive of this development. Their comment was that we would have to file the necessary FAA notifications for any construction projects on site. That is basically a site plan issue. The county oversees that, and that's a normal course of action. Currently, there is already a navigation easement on the property that clarifies how high buildings can be on the site without interference with the glide slope. Staff also brought up a couple items that they thought was major, and so we'd like to address those. The first one having to do with the comp plan. There's two exhibits shown here. One is the Airport Support District. That's the yellow area here. Our parcel is the pink area within the Airport Support District. The comp plan is fairly specific in this regard. If you're in the Airport Support District, you're supposed to be business or industrial. And it further goes on that says there's a need to continue implementing the airport support area expectations. Business and industrial usage should be the primary uses in the airport support area. So we are in compliance with this, with the Airport Support District, of which we are a part. And that's part of the comp plan. And so our feeling is we are in compliance with the comp plan. The other issue that staff brought up was cooperation between the properties to get certain improvements done. The current proffer has no provisions for cost sharing for any infrastructure improvement on the site. Each proffer is specifically assigned to a specific development, whether it's Land Bay 1 in the residential or Land Bay 2 for the commercial. Mr. Bishop mentioned the $75,000 for the Victory Lane Route 50 intersection improvements. That proffer specifically says before the first residential building permit, occupancy permit can be issued, the $75,000 contribution has to be made. That is not a requirement of the commercial development. It's a requirement of the residential development. And all the proffers are similar to that. There are no infrastructure improvements that are commonly required to be funded. There are no provisions in the proffer right now for shared cost. Mr. Oates brought up about the $20,000 contribution that was due in June. There is no provision for how that is supposed to be paid, whether that's a residential or whether that's a Land Bay 1 or Land Bay 2 provision. The only area that calls for cooperation in the proffer is the Master Property Owners Association, which the original proffer envisioned so that there would be one property owners association over both Land Bay 1 and Land Bay 2. We don't see a need for that now. Hines will be the only owner of Land Bay 2, and so they'll manage their properties and let the residential section manage their own properties. I'd also like finally to point out, I talked about the independent responsibility for construction of Coverstone Drive or any other infrastructure improvements, except for the 300,000 square feet of office that's allowed without any improvements right now. Before any commercial development could be constructed, there was a requirement to build Coverstone Drive from Millwood Avenue into the site. That requirement stems from one primary thing, that we were proposing 1.2 million commercial, 1.2 million square feet of commercial area generated 45,000 trips a day. And it was properly recognized that you could not put 45,000 trips a day on Prince Frederick Drive or Costello Drive to gain access to 522 or Route 50. And so that TIA required a separate connection to Route 50 because there was 45,000 trips that needed to be accommodated. The new proffer does not have 45,000 trips. Additionally, in the residential proffer section, the residential proffer says that before there's a residential occupancy permit done, it also mentions that Coverstone Drive has to be extended from Tazewell to Route 50. So it's both a requirement of the residential independently and a requirement of the commercial independently. There's nothing in the proffer that says the commercial has to develop. There's nothing in the proffer that says the residential has to develop. The residential could develop with no commercial development whatsoever, and the residential would be responsible for the construction of Coverstone Drive from Tazewell to Route 50. And the commercial section could develop without the residential and be responsible for the whole construction of Coverstone Drive, which was at that time justified because of the 45,000 trips a day. Finally, oops, wrong way, I'm sorry. Finally, just a couple things on the traffic study and how we got to where we are. Right now, just to summarize, just to put all this together, there's 1.2 million square feet of commercial area, which is going to generate 45,000 trips a day, which was the reason that development and the relocation of 522 was the reason Coverstone Drive was going to Inverleigh as a full 4-lane section road with walking trails. That 1.2 million square feet of retail generates between 1,000 and 1,500 truck trips a day, which, you know, it depends on the office and retail mix. It could be more, it could be less. It's important to remember that there's 300,000 square feet of office, doesn't qualify the office, could be government office, could be general office, allowed without any improvements whatsoever. They could have an access on Coverstone Drive, they could have access to Prince Frederick and not do any improvements at all. The current proposal is for 1.2 million square feet of industrial area that would develop the property and create a tax base that would generate about 3,100 trips a day, which is approximately the same as 300,000 square feet of general office. 300,000 square feet of government office would generate, according to the VDOT ITE methodology, over 6,000 trips a day. So we are matching the trip generation that is approved currently without any off-site improvements or without any extension to Coverstone Drive. But the difference is we're adding 3,100 trips to the existing road network, but we're building half of Coverstone Drive. We're building 2,200 feet of 4-lane road section, and we're making off-site improvements to make sure the level of service is acceptable at Prince Frederick Drive and 50, Costello and 522, and Costello and Prince Frederick Drive. And so just to summarize, we believe that we have addressed the impacts that are created by our development. There have been a few comments provided to us during meetings with the planning commissioners and from staff. One of those was staff's recommendation that they mentioned about the 10 cents a square foot for emergency services. We are more than willing to meet that requirement and proffer the 10 cents per square foot. Unfortunately, because of the process, we aren't able to revise the proffers before this meeting or we get delayed. So we are not able to revise the proffers to present to you tonight, but we would certainly agree to that 10 cents per square foot for emergency services. The other comment that was made was, why don't you make it simple and just limit the trip generation on the site to 3,100 trips a day? and we would certainly agree to that. We will put a stipulation on the site that we won't exceed 3,100 trips a day, and if we did submit a site plan that would create something over 3,100 trips a day, we would have to do another TIA and negotiate with VDOT on the required improvements. Mr. Thomas brought up some questions about truck trips around intersections. Those are all engineering-related items. We've done a TIA, which identifies impacts, that's been approved by VDOT. And when it comes time to design the improvements of those intersections that have been proffered, we're going to make sure, and VDOT's going to make sure that the intersection operates safely. I don't know how we could proffer that a truck won't turn over, because who knows what's going to happen. I mean, anything can happen. Anybody can drive a truck, I guess, if you have a CD license. So, again, going back to Gary's initial comment, you can't fix stupid. So something could happen out there. But we're not in a position that we can proffer that a truck won't turn over, because we don't know about that. So we think we've addressed all of our impacts. We're agreeable to the increased emergency services, and we're agreeable to the limit of the 3,100 trip generation, 3,100 trips per day. And so we would ask for a recommendation of approval, recommending to the Board of Supervisors they approve rezoning 0318, conditioned on us providing a 10 cent per square foot emergency services contribution and putting a limit of 3,100 trips, 3,100 trip per day generation on the site.
Thanks, sir.
Yep, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, a couple questions. And my comment about the trucks turning over wasn't meant for you to fix it. It was just meant that you say you can't fix stupid. We ought to pick the wisest.
Well, Gary said that. I was just quoting.
We ought to pick the wisest and safest way to get trucks to where they want to go, and that might not be the best choice. We shouldn't be forcing trucks through an intersection that we can anticipate there's going to be significant problems with them going through that intersection. That was my point of pointing that out. The other question I have is on your trip generation models, the 1,000 trucks a day that'll be generated coming out of there. Where do you see their path going out of the development with your current development plan for Coverstone Drive? Are they going east, west, 50, 81? What would be the flow?
That's an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Originally, when the plan was originally done, trucks were going both ways. They were taking 50 east to go down 17 through Delaplane. But now, since 17 has been restricted to trucks, VDOT, when we scoped the TIO with VDOT, they figured almost all the truck trips are going to I-81, which is why we studied Costello, Costello 522, and Costello and Prince Frederick. And it was envisioned that the truck trips would figure out which way is the best way to go. If Prince Frederick is definitely the busiest of those intersections right now, and with the development that's occurring further east on Route 50, and the added trips that will occur on Route 50 because of the development out at Independence and Route 50, then the truck trips are almost certainly going to be headed toward Costello and 522. Also because the Costello 522, if they go up to 81, that northbound movement is a straight shot. So it gives them options, but the easiest route is the Costello, the 522.
Well, that'll take them 3 turning actions to get to 81. If they got to 50, they would have 1 turning action.
They have to turn, but if they're going north, they'd have to make the right-hand turn to go on the north ramp, or make the left-hand turn to go on a left-hand turn over a short turn lane over the bridge.
Yeah. Your comment about the restriction on 17, if my memory serves me correct, this initial rezoning was done in 2004, 2005.
Right.
The restriction on 17, I think, occurred in 2001. So it was done before that original rezoning. So that shouldn't have played any factor in restricting the traffic going east.
And I'm not, I thank you for the clarification. But VDOT was making us look at those intersections to the east of the development, which is why we included the proffer for the residential at Victory Lane and 50. And at Sulphur, there were improvements also at Sulphur Springs and Route 50, even when Coverstone was relocated back to Inverleigh. There were improvements required at both of those intersections. So there wasn't some anticipation that there were trips, a lot of trips going that way on Route 50, which would not be envisioned under this current development proposal.
Yeah, I think most of the truck traffic will go west, not east.
Right.
Of course, you don't own the property that Coverstone Drive is on to get on to 50. Is that section a significant cost item compared to the other improvements you're making?
There are certainly more design items for that northern section. They have to cross Sulphur Spring, and there's an intersection that's got to be designed. But the left turn, the eastbound left turn was already installed. There would have to be a left turn, westbound left turn lane installed and signalization there. So there is more that needs to be done other than a straight road extension.
I mean, I still think we're creating a significant safety issue by putting tractor trailers on Prince Frederick Drive to make a westbound turn onto 50. And that bothers me.
Well, I would defer to VDOT on that, so.
Any other questions? Ron, I just got, can you go back to the slide where you had the airport support district up there? And can you make that bigger to what all that encompasses? And you made a
Oh,
statement.
you want to look at the map?
Yes, where you actually, does that encompass all these land bays?
Yes.
It does. And you made a statement in there, and correct me, that airport support district supported mainly industrial and M1?
Business, it says business and industrial.
Okay. And yet we have this residential component right smack in the middle of it.
That's a problem. Yes, sir.
The problem that now we're dealing with. I guess,
Well, I
then
mean,
you made
it's a different property owner. I mean, Miller and Smith owns that property. There's nothing I can.
And you
we
made
can do.
another statement in there along the way about the topography, I believe, did you say something about that the land, was not suitable or something? I thought I heard in there was something about, but maybe I was trying to write and listen at the same time.
For the original 522 route location when it was going to be brought up.
Oh, yes, that was back for the, when 522 was, when Coverstone Drive was going out to Sulphur Springs.
Okay.
There's about a 50-foot elevation difference between Governor's Hill and the Route 50 intersection.
Okay.
And it was that cut slope to get Coverstone Drive down to that intersection elevation that was proving to be too costly.
And while you're still there, and we're looking at this, and we all know that the housing is a challenge out there, this Land Bay 1 is also suitable for M1 industrial development also. I mean, there's nothing precluding, that's the topography, everything there just cries out for this to be there, but it's not, so,
Yes.
thank you.
And so this may be the first step of redevelopment of that whole parcel.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions after you all have a discussion.
This is a public hearing. This time I'll open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to come forward to speak on this matter is to come to the microphone. Please state your name, address, or Magistral District, either one.
My name is Paul Anderson. I'm Vice Chairman of the Winchester Regional Airport Authority, and we totally support this. This was the original intent when we first developed the airport of the land around the airport, and the county approved it. But then the county come along and made changes on it and put residential in. When we did this years ago, there were proffers put in place to support the airport. And Mr. Ruddy has a copy of a letter from our executive director of what these were, and we encourage the board, planning commission, and the board to look at these very carefully and make sure they're put in place to protect the airport. Right now, we're in the process, county just spent some money to do some work next to the public safety building so that we can start building hangars on that side. And we'd like to make sure the proffers are left in there so we don't get stuck with a big bill because all of a sudden things change and we're, in the process of moving. I'm not going to go through all this. Mr. Ruddy has it, but I do encourage you on behalf of the airport. Mr. Fisher's out of town, and he asked me to come here, and he said, keep it short. But I want to make sure that the proffers that were put in originally, that were still there when it was rezoned residential, they all are kept in there for use to the airport. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Anyone else would like to come forward? Yes, sir.
Oh, really?
Mr. Chairman and Planning Commission members, my name is Steve Ayler. I'm with Miller and Smith. It's been mentioned, we are the owners of parcel 64A83 and 64A83A. And mostly, it's all of Land Bay 1 and some of Land Bay 2. I guess I'm here tonight to ask you not to act on this rezoning case tonight or oppose it since the applicant has not contacted us. I found out about this matter through your public notice last week. Mostly because obviously they removed proper obligations on the overall rezoning case, some of which are unified development requirement, which is everything from architectural signage and landscape requirements, the transportation improvements. Obviously, everybody's been talking about Coverstone Drive. One item that wasn't mentioned is Tazewell Road, that there's a pretty decent portion of that that's on the applicant's property. So, and they'd have no proffer to provide that road that's on their property. So, for those reasons, I'm here just to ask that this be deferred or opposed until there's a common agreement on what happens with this under the current rezoning.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Seeing no one else, I'll close the public hearing and open it up to questions, response. Back to anybody, question, Mr. Thomas?
Could I ask staff a question?
May?
It's probably more of a legal question. If we rezone this tonight as submitted, the proffers that fall out from property owner for the Land Bay, well, the one we're discussing tonight versus Governor's Hill Land Bay, do all of the proffers that aren't included in this rezoning tonight automatically fall into Governor's 2 or to Land Bay 1?
In theory, yes. It's obviously going to be more difficult to enforce them. And in some cases, one of the triggers is 300,000 square feet of commercial. There's not going to be 300,000 square feet of commercial on that side. You do the math.
Anyone else? Mr. Oates?
Yeah, I've got a few comments, and Ron, I don't envy the cards you had to play on this one. As far as the Miller and Smith part of it, I don't have a lot of sympathy there because they stopped paying, so these parcels had to go back to the original owners. But anytime I look at one of these package that's come before us that's already rezoned and we already have proffers, I kind of have to sit there and look at it and go, are we better as a county to accept what's in front of us or keep the original proffers? The industrial part doesn't concern me. I'd much rather see that out there than houses or a tall office building or some type of high retail use. But what does concern me is if we break this off, the proffers that are left behind on Governor's Hill, just like with Sulphur Springs, that connection prohibited the development of that property. The proffers that are going to be left from that property, they're never going to be able to develop it. It's just going to be way too expensive for 550 houses. And if they come back and try to rezone that after the fact, say to industrial, you're back to the same game. That's a really expensive road to get out to 50 by yourself, and I just don't see that property ever developing then. I guess that's my biggest concern is I don't think we're going to be better off because the whole parcel is not going to be able to develop fully. As far as the turning movements, I hear you, Roger, but I agree with Ron. Some of that can be engineered. Yeah, there's going to be issues, but it can't be built. I'm a little worried about what the cash proffer would be if they can't get the right of way. How much money are we talking? There's never been really a design to come up with that number, an agreement. I realize VDOT's looked at this, accepted the TIA, but Mr. Bishop has concerns, and I said before, on traffic now, John's opinion outweighs VDOT when I'm sitting up here because he's looking at county, not statewide, and what our road plans are. So those are my concerns on this one. I don't think we're better off in the long run if we accept it and break it away from the existing rezoning. And I'm not in favor of tabling it.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Thomas.
I agree with a lot that Mr. Oates said. A few comments we can agree to disagree on, but I think industrial use for this property is much better than as it was previously zoned. I think that's would be a great use here. I don't think residential housing will ever fly on that other piece of property. The demand just isn't there. It would be good to have some more M1 inventory property for the county, for businesses coming in. My concern is still, and I respect VDOT, but I think when they look at things, they look at a very generalized overall picture, and I think Mr. Bishop has a much better handle on what's going on in Frederick County than VDOT does. And I'm concerned over the 1,000 tractor-trailer trips, the way we're forcing them out. If 522 was built and Coverstone could be connected into 522 directly, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Or if we could get connected into 50 at some other point other than Prince Frederick and 522, or, 50 and Prince Frederick. So I think, I disagree a little bit. I think the county may be better off with this being M1 than what it was previously zoned. But he's certainly correct that if this is rezoned M1 and all the other proffers fall into Land Bay 1, it will never be developed without coming back in for another rezoning. It would just be too expensive.
Thank you. Anyone else? I agree with my two commissioners on where we're heading on this. I don't know if we've had one in recent memory that's two ends of the spectrum. We're looking at the old proffers, and 90% of them are being refuted with our staff. The other side, we've got a very reputable company that's wanting to come and invest dollars in our town. And we look at that, and it's tough. But at the same time, there's other issues here with our roads and what have you. So I see both sides of where we're coming from this, but it's just there's a lot of moving parts here, and we seem to be completely two at the ends of the spectrum here on where we're going to land. And I agree with the Land Bay, the residential, and if those proffers go away, what does that mean to anyone that we get rezoning down the road when we come in for residential and what have you. What is our avenue we go from moving forward as a county and as a planning commission that we recommend to our board? So this is a tough one. And if there's no other comments, I'll seek a motion from our good gentleman from the district, and we'll go from there unless there's other comments.
Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend that we submit 03-18 rezoning to the Board of Supervisors for approval with the proffers as articulated.
And did you want those included, what the representative has said tonight? They'll be added into it, where the 10 cents a square foot and for the 3,100 trips. I have a motion for approval of 03-18. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Mr. Moan?
Moan, yes.
Dawson, yes.
Triplett, yes.
Bolden, no.
This is really a difficult one. Thomas, yes.
Oates, no.
Klein, no. Ambrogi, yes.
And the chair.
Chair votes no. Could I get a count on that, please?
5 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you, sir. Motion carries. This will go to the Board of Supervisors for their review at the December 12, 2018 meeting. Thank you. I think our next meeting is yet to be determined, so we don't have a meeting scheduled for the 20th of this month, or the 21st. So we'll get an announcement when our next meeting will be. It'll probably be the first Wednesday in December, but we don't know for sure yet. If there's no other items to come before us tonight, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.